here in Twin Cities. And that announcement was made, I think, on the 19th, a couple of days ago. I have the pleasure of interviewing two of the principals in that initiative here in Minnesota, and you'll see them on screen if you're watching us on Facebook, otherwise here on radio on KFAI. Kenneth Kelly is the CEO of the bank. He's joining us from Detroit. Kenneth, good to see you.
Great to see you, Al.
Damon Jenkins is going to be the guy on the point here in Minnesota who will lead the first Independence Bank in Minnesota. Let me start by Kenneth Kelly thanking you for being here, for joining the program, and for collaborating with a powerful group of players in Minnesota to bring something that has been talked about and needed for a very, very long time. And so let me ask you, Kenneth Kelly, to introduce the value proposition, the story of First Independence Bank, and how we've come to this moment where you're going to be opening a branch and growing your enterprise here in Minnesota.
Certainly, Al. Thank you so much for having us, and really enjoyed meeting you, I guess, a couple of weeks ago now. Yeah. And really just a high level of our story. It's a little bit very synonymous to what we're seeing today. Our story really started in 1967 in Detroit with the riots, the rebellion, based on police brutality. And the leaders in the market decided we needed to have an economic engine to really push our own destiny economically, and they created this bank. So we've been in existence now for 51 years and hopeful to parlay some of the infrastructure and the learnings over those 51 years into the Minneapolis market. Where we are today, you see great collaboration with partners like U.S. Bank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Bremer Bank, and Huntington TCF, to the point that now we've made an application and filed to the FDIC to really go ahead and be positioned to open up in November. We've identified our leader, who's now serving as a consultant with us, Damon Jenkins, who you see on the screen, who has a significant background with U.S. Bank and Wells Fargo. So we're excited to be here, and thank you so much for having us, Al.
Let's talk about the proposition of banking. What does banking mean to our people? What should we be thinking about, talking about across the dinner table?
Well,
what should mothers and fathers be talking in front of 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds about commerce, about business, about finance? How do we make this part of our normal everyday conversation? What do you think, Kenneth Kelly?
Al, you are spot on. This is a topic we need to talk more about. Sometimes when you are just surviving, you struggle with that. And so we're embarrassed to talk about money. But I think collectively, the African-American community could certainly be well served by making this a cornerstone of our dinner table discussions and our in front of the TV discussions and our on the internet discussions. We need to have this conversation more often. We know that money in a capitalistic society is the oxygen that supports us in society. And so what we would suggest is more conversations talking about these topics going forward, Al. And we want to be a part of that solution, Al. It's one of the reasons we're here with you. And we want to see you be successful being an African-American leader in media. We've got to support our institutions across the board if we ever expect that we are going to be supported by those who we'd love to do business with.
Tell the story of Black banks, if you would, because it's been one that was inspiring at one point in time, but then not. The origin of Black wealth building, though, is phenomenal. How back in the days of impossibility, Black men and women pooled resources and intelligence and collaboration and discovered opportunities to create major financial institutions, banks, and insurance companies. Then things happened. So there's been an ebbing and a flowing. If you would walk us through, to the best of your knowledge, what the flow has been of Black, commerce in the banking insurance sector.
Yeah, certainly, Al. I would tell you, I got to start as an old Southern Baptist. We've always made a way out of no way, right? And we've done that from the beginning of time. And, the question you asked really has a rich historic perspective. You need to read the book by Mercer Baradaran, The Color of Money in Black Banks. She does a great job in documenting that story. And it starts with the Freedmen's Bank, right? Right after the time right around the time President Lincoln was killed, they created a bank for the freed slaves known as the Freedmen's Bank. We put our trust in that system, and unfortunately, it betrayed us. And took just about half of those who had money in their 60 years to get their money out because it was mismanaged by people who didn't look like us. And that story is well documented. What we've also seen since 1865 up through today are ebbs and flows of African American bringing their commerce together. In turbulent times, the 1920s, you see one of our bank, Citizens Trust, was born in 1921. They're celebrating 100 years at this point in time, based in Atlanta. We saw it again in the 1970s, kind of coming out of the civil rights movement. At one point in time, there were 70 Black banks in this country. Today, we have just 18 that are African American controlled and owned. As recent as 2001, there were 48 African American controlled and owned banks. And now we're down to 18. So we're seeing that decline take place. So what it says is we've got to figure out how to create the dollar in a manner that will support our efforts, whether that's banking, whether that's media, whether that's life insurance, et cetera. But unfortunately, with the scaling of businesses and the lack of capital in the African American community, many of our businesses have gone out of business because of that lack of capital. And so what we're trying to do there in the Minneapolis market is create a spark. We know that bankers are beacons of hope, and hopefully harness some of the energy there from an economic perspective that could help African Americans and other underrepresented minorities.
I want to commend you and your team for being able to strike relationships with those who might be perceived as competitors. But at the end of the day, you know, the positive side of competition is that everybody wins.
Right.
That we compete with being better, doing better, serving better, and at the end of the day, the consumer finds a better quality of life, a richer environment to live and grow in, a healthier environment. So you've been able to create a relationship, you mentioned, with TCF Huntington Bank, with US Bank, with Wells Fargo, with Bremer Bank, and Bank of America. How did that come about, and how does it look? How does it work? Because the question is, an African-American business owner like Al McFarlane is excited that a Black-owned business bank is coming to town. At the same time, I've got a history of a great relationship with TCF Bank, for example, and with US Bank. So do I have to deal with divided loyalty because I love the notion of building, nation building,
yes,
and doing business in my community, but also have experiences that have been fruitful for me? What do you think? How do you reach and define and create a way to serve people like me in this marketplace?
Certainly, Al, and I would tell you, we try to make life sometimes too black and white, but it's really, really gray, to be candid with you. And I have a very simple expression. I don't need all of your money. I just need some of your money. And so that's not to ask you to betray people who have been in the ditch with you, who help you get started as a business person. But we also know that competition sharpens iron, as you just mentioned a moment ago. And so to your original question of how the relationship built, it's very complex, but I'll hit it in a couple of ways. One, we had a relationship with TCF that went back to when it was Chemical Bank. We bid it on business with the city of Detroit several years ago. And so that created a relationship. Greg Cunningham and I, who's a leader there in the market, we met 2 years ago at the Congressional Black Caucus. We also signed an agreement where we built a relationship based on the U.S. Treasury's Mentor Protege program. So that was a relationship. Wells Fargo is an investor in our bank, and also Bank of America. So many of these relationships that kind of naturally evolved really came about because there were 5 leaders in your market who basically said, let's put our brands on the shelf and find a way to work together for the betterment of those who are less fortunate in our community, in particularly the African American community. And so a guy by the name of Mike Jones and Donnell White, who's based in Detroit, reached out to me and said, we'd love to have your perspective. We'd love to talk with you about this. And hey, by the way, why don't you come meet the rest of the team? And so it developed from there, and to this point that now we filed an application, and we're looking forward to the continued work between those 5 banks and our bank under Damon's leadership there in the market.
Well, what's important to me, Kenneth Kelly, is that there are so many unbanked people in my community. And I'm hoping that, among other things, this renewed attention, the renewed focus on the need of, the power of the resource access that banking represents can ignite people to, again, figure out how to find their own advantage in coming into the banking system, as opposed to being in a process of what I call perpetual victimization by using other sources that are out there, like payday loans and
Right.
check cashing operations, that at the end of the day rob us, from my point of view. I see that my colleague and friend Greg Cunningham is here. Greg, good to see you. How you doing, man?
Hey, Al, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. And before I go further, let me just announce to my listeners here on KFAI, this is Conversations with Al McFarlane. I'm Al McFarlane, and today my program focuses on an exciting new venture, the creation, the introduction of a new bank in Twin Cities. And Detroit's first Independence Bank is going to be entering our marketplace. It'll be the only and first new, anyway, Black-owned bank in Twin Cities, something that we've been talking about for ages, and now it's about to become a reality. Greg, I'm going to throw some credit to you, because I think it's been your doggedness and your raising of questions that caught the attention of people inside the U.S. Bank Organization and other organizations that together decided that collaboration is the appropriate strategy for addressing what appeared to be daunting issues. You know, there was an issue of general hands-off or neglect that the Black community was experiencing, but which I think came into sharp focus with the death of George Floyd and the pandemic of COVID-19. These things together create a unique set of problems, but a unique set of problems also create unique opportunities. And I see all of you responding to that. Greg, thank you for being here. Just an opening comment, and I'll come back to you in a second. What did you feel from way back when in addressing the question of how banks can be effective in our community?
Well, what was important, Al, and Kenneth touched on this in his remarks.
And lean into your microphone for me.
What was important to me, Al, and Kenneth touched on this a little bit in his remarks when he talked about the Freedmen's Bank in the period both prior to emancipation and what followed. If you recall, Al, there was a time in this country when the Black leadership met on an annual basis, where the leadership of the Black community in this country would come together and talk about what our shared agenda was and how we could move forward together. And what struck me as really critical in the wake of George Floyd's murder was that what we needed was some sort of alliance of alliances, that there are a lot of people doing a lot of great work, Al, both individuals, organizations, and people like yourselves and many others who have boots on the ground every single day. And what is different this time that has been missing, in my opinion, is a way for us to catalyze bringing all of those folks together, the Black community sort of aligning around a shared agenda, and then the business community and others supporting that agenda. Said differently, Al, this notion of Black-centered design. And, a number of us Black leaders got together very early on, starting with members of the Belay and many others. And we reached out to a number of organizations and individuals and said, we want to create this alliance of alliances. And the alliances aim to really do three things. One, to create a shared agenda. Two, to make sure that we were committed for the long term. And three, to make sure that it was Black-centered in its design. So that was really the genesis of, I think what you see happening in this community, Al, is sort of this sweeping notion of collaboration and partnership, and a very focused and shared agenda on how we catalyze outcomes.
I think it's consistent with the story of our community and of our ascent towards freedom and engagement. Kenneth Kelly, would you sort of build on that and talk about your personal story, how you got into banking and what made you set you on the path that you're on today in the banking and finance world?
Well, Al, it's a very interesting question, and I don't know if we have enough time to cover all of it, but I will tell you that, I had a great career. I'm an engineer by training, worked for a company by the name of Southern Company, and really got to learn a lot of the nuts and bolts of doing business, from engineering to marketing, finance, corporate finance, human resources, supply chain management, marketing, and most importantly, mergers and acquisitions. And so I got to a stage in my life to where I was able to retire right after my 50th birthday, or right as I approached 50, and made a decision to come and look after our family business. The history of this bank: it was purchased by my cousin in 1980, who was a music producer, which is a commonality there with the city of Minneapolis. He produced all of Johnny Taylor and Marilyn McCool, Billy Davis Jr., You Don't Have to Be a Star, and owned a studio there in Detroit, United Sound, where Aretha Franklin, Anita Baker, and so many others. But long story short, Don parlayed his money into buying this bank in 1980 to save the bank, actually, because it was coming out of the Jimmy Carter era. And he ran it successfully through 2015, and I ended up becoming a trustee in 2014, I'm sorry, when he passed 2015. And so we decided to go ahead and to get engaged in this, because we recognized that there was a way to have an impact on our community. And so for me, watching what we were doing and what we were trying to accomplish, it just became a great vehicle for us to have an impact. And so we ended up becoming the leader of the National Bankers Association and meeting individuals like Greg and so forth. So if I had to sum up the story, mine started humble beginnings. I come from a blue collar working family. I have 4 generations all buried inside of a 25-mile radius in Barber County, Alabama. But with hard work and love, I would say to your listening audience, your kids can achieve and do anything that they desire.
Let me throw a couple of things out at you. One, I have business partners in Detroit. One of them deceased, Charles Kelly. You might have known Charles Kelly, who owned the Michigan Citizen newspaper. But I also did business with the famed Detroit part of the Defender organization, the Michigan Chronicle.
Yes.
And, you might have known Sam Logan.
I don't know Sam, but I know the current leader there, Hiram Jackson's a good friend of mine.
Hiram's a good friend of mine as well. So
yes.
My regards to him, and a visionary coming out of music as well. So consistent with what you're doing. So, the question is this idea of generational wealth. And I'm so glad you mentioned 4 generations that are connected in Alabama. I ask you, and I'll ask Greg and Damon to talk about how do we train our attention as a community, as individuals, to think about the things we do today having an impact 7 generations into the future. How do we sort of refocus and create a new gravity, a new intensity in our ordinary steps and breathing, so that these activities are with intention, delivering a result 7 generations down the road? What do you think, Kenneth Kelly?
Sure. I would say it's all about, your personal motivations, right? I'm sitting in the seat that I'm in because of sacrifices made by my parents, by their parents, by many others, in basically having to deal with the humiliation that they had to deal with, doing jobs they didn't want to do, making sacrifices so I can get an education. And that happens for families, in particular African-American families, all across this country. And so when I, start with that as my motivation for what I am doing now for my kids, it is about self-sacrifice. And so many times we get caught up in materialism, but the reality is your legacy won't be about the material things you possess. It's going to be the philosophical things that you pass. And so I would say, as a parent, even in the midst of all your struggles, we've all been there where we're just trying to pay bills, keep the lights on, and hopefully not be evicted. What is it that you are passing on to your family in a way that when you're gone, because we all know we're going to leave here, in such a manner that will instill them and inspire them to do better. And so when you start with that as your basis, then money becomes an oxygen, so to speak, to figure out how to pass that philosophy on in a way that hopefully they can breathe a little bit easier.
Talk about your own family story a little bit more, if you would. I love doing the genealogy reports. Have you done personal genealogy so you know more about your personal ancestry?
Yeah, we have, and I go all the way back to a slave who ironically was brought to that 4-county area, Barber County, Eufaula, by a Scottish banker from South Carolina. Beyond that, we've had to do the DNA test, and it takes us, back to the west coast of Africa. But that's as far back as we've gone, and that was into the early 1800s. So we have family members that again, kind of spawn and geometrically kind of bring us to that point where it then kind of goes in the opposite direction. But yeah, we certainly have done that. And that's just, I just find that as a rich opportunity to learn about yourself and to understand why your family acts and behave the way that they do. And so that becomes a part of us. And so we've done that over many years. But thank you for asking that out.
Well, I think it has to do for me, Ken and Damon and Greg, with the notion of identity. How do we forge an identity of ourselves individually and our families and our communities and our culture? An identity that moves us more consistently, more steadily, more confidently into a future that is bountiful and that is productive and that reflects who we believe, who we articulate, that we really, really are inside. And the family, to me, is the way to do that, as you're doing. Greg, you're nodding your head. I'm just talking, but I'm interested in feedback. How do we move our community into a definition of self that is the epitome of prosperity, of frugality, of good decision making, of lawfulness, right? Of character? What do you think, Greg Cunningham?
For me, Al, it all starts for me with sort of a more honest analysis of history and where and what we come from. We have a tendency in this country, Al, to really romanticize history, and the truth of the matter is it's quite nuanced. And I think the history, the history that's been shared with us, both through our experiences and in our homes, I think we have to do a better job of sort of telling our history and creating that lineage and that legacy in our children. I was always sort of taught to question and analyze things that not just for their face value, because that, as James Baldwin was fond of saying, like, sometimes we become co-conspirators in our own demise because we start to believe the things that were taught to us about who we are. And I think we have to redefine who we are, who we come from, and what are our hopes and dreams, and think about things like financial health as part of our total health. We know that the social determinants of health include our physical health, our social health, our mental health, our how we show up in community, and certainly our financial health. And I think we've got to begin to have conversations about total wellness and how each one of these components that we have control over, and we have control over our behavior and the decisions that we make, and taking more accountability for the own decisions we make in response to all of the things that have been perpetrated upon us. But our response to that is something that we control. And I think the more that we can support each other and come together as community and think about efforts like the one that Kenneth and Damon are leading for us here in the Twin Cities, these things are foundational to building infrastructure in our community. Having an entire ecosystem, financial ecosystem in our community is critical. I often tell the story, Al, I work for a large bank here in the Twin Cities, but I never forget the fact that, growing up, my mother's mortgage was with the local credit union. And had our mortgage been with a large bank, we would have been on the street. Like, the only reason that we were able to stay in our house was because the gentleman who ran the credit union, he went to church with us. He lived down the street from us. He knew us. He was from our community. And so when we get back to having ownership of those basic needs that support our community, that's how we begin to build. And it's one block at a time. It's one neighborhood at a time. It's taken 400 years to create these disparities. It's not going to change in 3 years, 5 years. It's going to take that kind of stamina and long-term commitment. And so I think us really, I kind of said it well. And, there are times when we have to sacrifice the immediacy, the gratification of immediacy, and think about what's coming behind us, because those who came before us weren't just thinking about themselves. They were thinking about all of us and we truly are the byproduct of their sacrifice.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. My guest, you just heard Greg Cunningham. Greg is a friend and a personality, not only here but around the country. He's the Vice President for Global Inclusion and Diversity at U.S. Bank, but you might have known him from his excellent work at Target prior to that, and prior to that, excellent work at United Negro College Fund. Been a fixture and a pillar in the community for a long time, and he's still a young guy. And a great family man. And Kenneth Kelly is here. Kenneth Kelly is the CEO and chairman of First Independence Bank of Detroit, a bank that is opening a branch here in Twin Cities. We're going to talk in a minute with the leader of that local initiative. His name is Damon Jenkins. And I wanted to focus on you because you've got to leave in about 3 or 4 minutes, Kenneth Kelly. And Damon, I'm not ignoring you, but I'm going to be able to spend more time with you once we have enjoyed the opportunity to spend this time with Kenneth Kelly. Kenneth, what's the strategy for bringing your brand and your product into this marketplace? How do you distinguish yourself and distinguish the value that you're going to add to the Greg's work ecosystem, the financial ecosystem of Twin Cities, in a way that specifically enables and addresses the needs of our people?
Sure. I would tell you, Al, the first thing we're planning to do is to listen. And we've done some of that to get to the point of opening or filing an application to open a branch. But Damon, under his leadership, we'll be listening first and trying to become a servant second in this effort. And what we do know is that when you look at banking institutions, they help support the ecosystem that Greg mentioned just a few moments ago. And so one of the things that's really been lacking is the ability for African Americans as business owners to scale. Over 90% of African American business owners are sole proprietors. And that's no, hit on them. But the reality is we need to figure out how can they scale. And it's going to take part of the strategy. Al, as you and I talked about a week plus ago, I need to have conversations with you and your peers, Pete and Harry, to talk about how do we incorporate our African American media. We need to talk about some of the Black businesses or African American owned businesses, the Hmong businesses, the Muslim businesses in that community to be positioned such that when we have discussions with corporate leaders in that market, we can have competent discussions about building infrastructure that could support our communities, because that ties into hopefully more jobs, which ties into in shrinking the home ownership gap there you have in Minnesota. So I would say at a high level that's part of the strategy. And we want to be a part of the solution. We're not going to be, as Sandra Samuel would say, we didn't come as the sage on the stage. This is one of those where we're going to try to lock arms with those who want to lock arms with us and hopefully roll in the right direction to help mitigate some of these differences that Greg just mentioned ago that's not going to get solved overnight.
Will we be seeing you in the marketplace from time to time, Kenneth Kelly? I know you've got able leadership locally here, but will you be here often as well?
Absolutely. We'll be there from time to time, but Damon's going to be our leader there in that market, and we're going to give him all the support that he needs to hopefully be very successful there in reaching out to the community. But bottom line is we're going to certainly make ourselves available, Al.
Kenneth Kelly, thank you so much.
Thank you. You all take care.
We'll be seeing you.
All right. Thanks, Al.
Damon and Greg.
Hi, Greg. See you, Damon.
You can.
Damon, let me jump to you. Thank you for being patient, and thank you for the role that you're shouldering in bringing this new product into the marketplace. Let me read from your mini bio here. Damon Jenkins works for First Independence Bank as a senior vice president, regional consultant for Twin Cities. In this role, he directs all facets of operations for the retail branch offices in the Minneapolis area. Jenkins defines sales and services initiatives for the region. He develops objectives and measurement standards and monitors each branch performance. He ensures the branch administration teams conduct operations and provide the service and product offerings that meet the needs of customers in the Minneapolis region. He's been in the banking industry for 14 years. Prior to this, he worked this role, worked at Wells Fargo as the vice president and district manager for Wells Fargo's downtown Minneapolis district. He also served as vice president, district manager at U.S. Bank Minneapolis, He's skilled in employee development, coaching. He's a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion. He served as the co-chair of the Wells Fargo Black African American Employee Resource Group, and he serves as an executive member in the African Development Center. He volunteers with various local nonprofit organizations in Twin Cities. Graduate of the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities campus, a BS degree in educational psychology, and spends time outside of work. He's in Minnesota fishing, right? And grilling and going to church, watching sports with family and friends. Nice story, good background. Damon, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Al. Appreciate that.
Well, I really want to take hats off to you, first of all, to you for number one, stepping up, for being prepared for the opportunity. And then when the opportunity knocked, you opened the door and are walking on through. And I think that says a lot about you, but it says a lot about the opportunity. It says a lot about I'm really amazed, and that's kind of the simplest word I can put to it, with the level of cooperation. I think it's significant and important that who we have viewed as competitors are collaborators, right? And I can't overstate how significant it is that U.S. Bank and Wells Fargo and Huntington, TCF, Bremer, and I think Bank of America together have decided that we've got a shared mission. Greg said these companies checked their brands at the door and came to the workspace, and the work is created now. The work at hand is the creation and deployment of First Independence Bank here in Minnesota. So how did you come to this? How was the offer brought to you to encourage you to step up and say, I'll lead this initiative?
Thanks, Al. I'll go back and I'll say what my mom always told me: careful what you pray for. And I'll tell you, after George Floyd was killed, that hit home because my mom's is still a 32-year resident of Minneapolis, right in the community that George Floyd was murdered in. And I grew up in that community. And so I've read this story of Black males' lives getting taken by the hands of the folks that's supposed to protect us. And so it just hit home. And so coming off the pandemic and things like that, I just prayed, to be honest, for me, the next chapter of my life, to put me in a position where I can be a servant to other people. I just felt like as things manifest and the rioting and the social unrest started happening, we were out there. I sat on my mom's porch and watched buildings burn, watch people come down the blocks looting and come back the next day trying to sell us the same things. And so I realized that our people, as a result of that, it wasn't, I should say, prior to that, our people needed help, and not just Black people, just the people in these underserved communities. Mm-hmm. Because as I've always said, and I'll continue to say this, if you were a person that didn't have resources, if you needed food and you had no means to get food, now you saw that grocery store door was wide open from looting, guess what? You probably won't say it out loud, but you're going to go up in there and get you some food too. And so I really wanted to be a part of, let's really tackle the why and the root cause of these things. And so I prayed to be put in a position where I can use my relationship building, my banking influence and experience, but also be a servant to the communities that I grew up in, because it hit home. And shortly after the killing of George Floyd, I saw a need at Wells Fargo to really help foster these tough conversations, within my own district, within the company, because I think what was different with George Floyd is it really showed a lack of care. You couldn't really make the excuse, if you will, in my opinion, that some would have made for the prior situations, because you really saw that for 8 minutes and 46 seconds that there was a lack of care. And so I realized that within my own district, that I had to help my employees and the communities that we serve really have these conversations. And so it just started there. We started having conversations of why this happened, not the fact that people were looting, but let's talk about the reasons why. Let's talk about all the discrepancies that the inner city residents or communities face, and this led up to that. And so from there, Wells Fargo had started the conversations with the other 4 banks and saying, how can we do something together that we can't get accomplished by ourselves? And I was given the opportunity, was first posed as a question of if I was interested, and I had to pray on it because, it's easy enough to stay in your own world, especially when you've been blessed and you've been accomplished, is to drive up in my own driveway and close my garage door and say, not my problem. But because of that, prayer was just something put on my heart that just had this feeling of unrest to say, I have to go and make a difference. So I jumped right in. Didn't know much at first because I hadn't signed the NDA, but it just felt right. And so after I signed the NDA and really heard what was working, it directly aligns with my why. I'm a product of why this work is important. And I think that I've been blessed with the platform, but also with the relationship building skills to be that buffer between what I would call corporate America and even the communities or even the hood streets that are typically overlooked.
I'm Al McFarlane. You're listening to Conversations with Al McFarlane, the voice of Damon Jenkins, who's the leader of the new First Independent Bank branch opening here in Twin Cities this fall. I think as early possibly as November. And we're talking about that. Also, Greg Cunningham, a global inclusion and diversity leader at U.S. Bank. But I call Greg a neighborhood kid. And both these guys, I'm calling them neighborhood kids because they know the community, they've been in it. And so, Damon, let me ask you more about that. I'm so glad you shared about your mom living over in South Minneapolis, close to Ground Zero. I call the location of that tragic incident Ground Zero for the world. The entire world witnessed something that was intolerable, that was evil, and that was unacceptable. And I think the entire world felt at one level or another the way you felt, called to pay attention, to examine anew, and to question things that we had chosen not to look at and not to question, and to let our shorthand allow us to gloss over these inequities and these disparities. But now the issue was brought to us in a way that compelled our focus and our attention, and many have been and continue to respond to that. I think this initiative is a reflection of the need to respond, and it's not the only one, but it's an important one. But tell me more about your growing up. Were you and your family born here in Minnesota, or did you come here from somewhere else?
So give you a little bit of my background. So I wasn't originally born here. I was originally born in Kansas City, Missouri.
That's
my
hometown.
Okay. All right. Good. Chiefs fan, I hope.
No,
but,
go ahead.
But and so my mom, I'm the youngest of 7. It's 5 boys and 2 girls, and my mom raised us all by herself. And so again, as you think about what the average urban household goes through, I lived that. My mom moved us here for the resources. At the time, Minnesota had great resources. So we moved here in 1988. And I remember hearing my mom try to sell us on why we should move and convince us. And she just said point blank that I'm trying to make a better life for you. And in Minnesota, even though it's cold and you can't shoot fireworks on the 4th of July, because that's back before you could shoot fireworks here, there's resources out there that's going to really help you guys and benefit. And so she moved us here. And as a result of that, I grew up in what they would call Minneapolis public school systems. And I, again, lived the discrepancies. I as a student,
where'd you start living? Where did you live?
So we moved right to, what's that neighborhood? It's South Minneapolis. I want to say not too far from the American Indian Center. It was right off of 14th and Franklin. Phillips neighborhood. Yep. So we first moved to Phillips neighborhood, and we rented there for about 1.5 years. And then my mom got her credit together through Acorn. They helped her out, and she bought the home in 91, right off of Chicago on Lake Street, where she's been for the last 30 plus years. It's still weird not to see Robert Shoe Store there, that iconic building there. But we grew up, and like I said, growing up in Minneapolis, understanding that it's the most or segregated part of Minnesota, I lived it. I can recall just growing up and being mindful not to walk down Chicago from Lake Street towards George Floyd Square, Ground Zero, in a group of 5 or more, to prevent from being placed on the ground or on top of a squad car. And so those were our lived experience. But I'll tell you something that, again, you talk about, and I'll use my good friend and colleague Houston White's words. You talk about mixing culture and capacity here, right? I remember the local Boys and Girls Club, the Jack Cornelius Boys and Girls Club. And I remember that summer that we first moved here, my mom's got us memberships there. She didn't pay a bill just so she can afford for my brother and I to get a membership at that Boys and Girls Club. But now that I realized what she was doing was giving us a place that was different than the hangout spot, giving us a place to go and connect us with more resources. So as a result of that, I got into basketball. As a result of that, I got into public speaking. As a result of that, my brother got into singing. And we met a Black leader at that time at the club named John Hardiman. You may know this guy.
Sure.
And I remember at 12 years old, he taught me how to tie my first double Windsor knot.
Mm-hmm.
And what he told me was, you know what, I'm preparing you for the future, because when I'm done with you, you'll be tying a lot of those.
Wow.
And the accountability and the inclusiveness just there. So when you think about, again, the resources that's needed for people that grow up in our communities, I was exposed to that. So then I went to Anderson Elementary School. I went to Sanford Middle School. I graduated from Minneapolis South, went on to the U. And so I'm a Minneapolis guy. I lived in St. Paul. I am homegrown. But one thing I'll tell you is that the things that we are creating here with this ecosystem is going to ensure that we really play more in this equity space, because that's what it's all about at this stage of the game. We've been knocking on the diversity and inclusion space for far too long. It's time now to start to create equity. And I'm just excited because this is going to be something that definitely puts us down that path.
Talk about your own family's legacy and history. You mentioned your mom, Kansas City. I grew up at, just so you know, 28th and Brooklyn.
Okay. Yeah.
Then from there, I think 32nd in Indiana, around the corner from Central High School. And after there, at 44th and Elmwood, that neighborhood, and went to Westport High School. So you know where I've been before our family came to Worthington, Minnesota, with my dad's job at the Armour's Packing House. And we've been in Minnesota since, I think, maybe 1965. So that's kind of my personal story, but I relate to your moving from Kansas City for the opportunity that Minnesota, was supposed to, and in fact, actually did provide to our family. Prior to that, what's your lineage story?
So my mom was born in Leland, Mississippi. And they migrated. Most of my family was born in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. And so a huge part of my family migrated to Kansas City. So that's where the core of my family now resides, in Kansas City. As a matter of fact, we just laid my great aunt, who was 88. She was like the big mama of the family. We just laid her to rest a couple of weeks ago. So I'm just returning back from there. But so if you look us up, you're going to see pretty much Kansas City, Mississippi. And then some of us have ventured off into Detroit and some of those areas as I get into some of my great uncles. But the most of us now reside still in Kansas City.
Where is Leland? Where is that?
Leland, now you are challenging because I've never been there. However, I think my mom says it's one of the countryest of the countryest places in Mississippi. So I'm assuming it's somewhere south.
Got it. I can tell you this: my wife's family is my mom's family is from Sunflower, Mississippi, in the Delta, and my wife's family is from the Jackson, Mississippi area. And I can tell you, I love Mississippi. I love the people, the energy. I'm sad by the impact of the COVID-19 and the reluctance of people to pay attention to the protocols and to the availability of vaccination. But the energy of the people, the resilience of the people, is something that's admirable, and I think it shows and how your family and mine and others, Greg, all were on the great migration, moving after slavery to places where there might be opportunity to breathe a little bit, right, and to grow and plant roots and to develop into who we knew that we were and could become. So, Damon, let me ask you what the plan is. What's the marketing strategy for opening the first Independence Bank, and talk about where the bank is going to be, the first one and the second one, and what kinds of services you envision offering? What's the rollout going to be like? How do you start a bank, right? How do you bring a bank online? I mean, let's do some education. This is Banking 101. So talk about it.
You know, I think we've done pretty much the hardest part, and that's the listening part. Because when you come into, especially when you come into a different state, and then you don't want to come in as an expert. You know, as Kenneth said, as Sandra Samuel said, we didn't want to come in with the sage on the stage type of, because we couldn't solve this, you know. I think right now it's really continued to partner and say, how can we be a resource beyond the resources that have been provided? Because I get that question. I just got it this morning. So there's a bank that's going to be here. What's going to be different, and how does it impact me? And I think the biggest thing for me is financial wellness. As I think about the greatest opportunity beyond, of course, we got to stand the thing up, and we're going to hire people and all those other things. But as we get there, I think my primary or first priority is continue to partner but create financial wellness. You know, as I think about the things that a lot of the fears that specifically people of color, but then unbanked people have of large banks or just banks in general, a lot of it comes from miseducation or inexperience. Mm-hmm. And so I think if we can partner short-term and long-term to really start to go down that path, then we can really start to put people in a place where they can be responsible, but also we can continue to power the potential of the folks that are just needs that extra push. But we also need to partner with the ones that have been in this fight, and they just now need that resource. They now need that connection, that beacon of hope. The other part of it is with everything that's been going on in the communities, specifically in South and North Minneapolis, we need some positive news. We need something to be excited about, and to be quite frankly with you, we need our own. Mm-hmm. You know, and so this is, in my opinion, the start of that. The other part of it is understanding that, our primary goal is to really service the African American community, but there, beyond the African American community, there's other subcultures in our communities that are underbanked as well. Mm-hmm. As you think about our indigenous, as you think about our Latino, our Latina, as you think about even our Somali customers. And so me having my 14-year banking career working with US Bank and Wells Fargo in the Twin Cities, I've been able to understand that and learn that. Mm-hmm. And so understanding that that's what we're going to offer. You know, we have to figure out how do we ensure that everyone has the opportunity to what they call the American dream. And that's creating equity in every community. So that's the broader picture. But right now, you know, our first location is on University. Now, ironically, that was my former branch as I worked for Wells Fargo, because they transitioned to the University of Minnesota campus. So I'm quite familiar with that location. I think it's prime location because it's right there between Minneapolis and St. Paul. Mm-hmm. And so it gives you access to both communities. It's right on the light rail. It's right on the bus line, which we know that in communities of color, we are highly dependent on public transit. Mm-hmm. So that gives an option for them to get to the bank. The other part, there's a drive-through there. And we know with drive-throughs and the luxury to have that being in Minneapolis. The other part of it is, which I'm elated about, because my daughter's a current student, is we're close to the babies right there on the University of Minnesota campus. And so as I think about also connecting, we're looking to serve that community and connect with those young children early, because I think about my years of growing up, and it was late in the game that I got the importance of simply just saving, tucking some away, not spending it all, or even not letting money validate your worth. And I think as we as we set up there, it creates the opportunity for us to touch all those facets. And then the other part of it is, as we then relocate to our Lake and Hiawatha location, which we're destined to have that thing up going in June of next year, we'll still be able to maintain a bank presence in that university location that will still be available for not just the residents, but if you've been in that area, you know that's a growing community. And then with the partnership with PPL and how they'll reimagine that space, it's just a win-win for the community and for us as we continue to grow our brand, but also grow our commitment, our relationship to the community.
You know, the challenge is great. Part of the challenge, maybe the greatest space for the challenge, is in the minds of our community. And as you were talking, Damon, I was thinking sort of, it brought me back to when I'm 73 now, but when I was 23, a brother who owned an insurance company, Glover Insurance, tried to sell me some insurance products. And I tell you, I confess to you that I was arrogant, stupid, bullheaded, and felt invincible. And so my attitude was, how dare you talk to me about insurance? Because insurance is for those weak people that think they're going to die. And of course, I will never die, right? And so I'm saying that there is so much miseducation, misinformation in our community, and I'm owning up to my own ignorance. And I say that to ask you and Greg to talk about what we do to vanquish ignorance in our community, the ignorance that we put in front of us to keep us making bad decisions, ill-informed decisions, decisions that work against our own interest. How do we do that? Greg, what do you think? Jump in there.
I think nothing changes behavior, Al, more than seeing people who share your circumstance, have success and prosper, and be willing to share how they did it. You know, I think we have to rely on each of us to make sure that we are considering ourselves the educators, that we accept the responsibility, as Damon talked about, around financial wellness, to talk about, how we've gotten to the places that we've gotten. And, without sounding preachy, without sounding condescending, and really just sharing those stories. And I don't think we do that often enough. I think so often, those who have a little bit of success are just so happy to have that success that they don't send the elevator back down. And I think, Al, we've got to begin to send the elevator back down and see our own individual success as a step for the community. And I think we do that. I think, so many of us have to just now, before we just have success and sort of run to the suburbs, and the only time we come into the city is to get our hair cut or, to buy some food or go to church or do all that. It's actually, we have to actually stop in these communities and spend time volunteering and committing ourselves to helping others have similar type of success.
Damon, jump in. I asked your colleague, Brother Kelly, about this notion of moving with intention, about having in the back of our minds and in our spirit an awareness, an acute, personal, visceral awareness of what our obligation is to the 14th generation out. So it's not about me, it's not about just my kid or just my kid's kid, but beyond that. What do you think about that question that I raised, and how do you see yourself responding to this longevity, the long arc of the development of our people and of humanity itself? What do you think, Damon Jenkins?
Well, I think it's definitely a marathon and not a sprint, just because it's not going to happen overnight. But I do think we got to get our subculture back to thinking beyond today. I mean, as has been touched on earlier, we can get in crisis mode where we're just trying to survive. We're just trying to maintain. And so we have to move past that, and we have to really start to plan. and really think, and then own what we can own. Everyone in some point at time have some type of cash flow. And so you have to be accountable what you're doing with it, and so I think that there's a piece there. The other part of it is exposure. I think you have to see different. You have to be exposed to different to do different. And unfortunately, sometimes where you're not exposed to anything different than what your subculture is, it doesn't allow you to make those connections. And so, one, we have to really bring that back to our dinner table, but we also have to create that. Even myself, as a Black professional, we have to have that obligation to our community again. We can no longer, what I call, become so busy in our own siloed world that we really, to Greg's point, don't send the elevator back down. But even I would add into that, get in the elevator and ride back down with it. We all get busy. We all got things going on, especially if you're a parent. But I think you just have to make it a part of your agenda to serve in that capacity where you're being a blessing to other people. The other part of it is, I think the resources, as Greg talked about the alliance of the alliance. What I love about that, because it really is starting to show that there's a lot of resources right here in our backyards that we just don't know about because everyone kind of had their own individual thing. And so as you start to really expose our subculture to these resources, you also expose them to individuals that look like them, that represent that. And that would be my last piece is, if I can see more people in banking, if I can see more people, more Black people, or more people of color in the professions, then, it gives me something to strive for. It gives me another sense of purpose. And then for self-obligation and accountability, I think you really have to want better to do better.
Greg, I'm going to let you close the program by responding to this question of vision. I really appreciate the ideas you brought forward today. I often tell people in your company, Greg, that Insight News itself got launched. We started because we had the support of John Warder. John Warder is a Black man who was the leader of First Plymouth National Bank on Plymouth Avenue, where there's a daycare today and across from what was the shopping center, which is now Euroc. But that institution and that leader, that individual, listened to me as a young firebrand and believed when I came in saying I'm going to change the world by creating my own publication, and committed to running back page, full page ads for the launch of the publication. So that was how much power and how important that relationship is. And I'm hoping that me sharing the story will enable and motivate both of you to continue having that kind of impact on the lives of young entrepreneurs in our community. But I'll close with this, Greg, you got about a minute. What's the vision? What are you seeing in your mind's eye that we can accomplish in this arena?
To me, it's all about access, and I think we all benefit when we have communities that are economically viable. And when there's economic vitality, that's great for everyone. And so the vision is that we create a region, we create a city, we create communities that are vibrant, that everyone considers their community, and they're not drive-by communities anymore. They're communities where all of us are thriving and prospering together. And I think to the point that Damon made, we have to make sure that that our young people are exposed to successful business people, that the only billionaires in our community aren't just in entertainment, that we expose them to successful business people in all aspects, because our culture is so rich and the talent is so deep. I think our responsibility as a business community is just to continue to support small businesses and entrepreneurs so we can just keep continuing to create jobs and economic mobility in our community.
I want to close last 30 seconds, Damon. How people reach First Independence Bank if they're curious by virtue of this conversation and they want to bring their deposits or ask questions, how do they line up to do business with you?
Well, more to come on that as we are finalizing the specific channels. But right now, feel free to email me at djenkins at firstindependence.com. And I'll be politely and gladly glad to facilitate those.
Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. Take care.
Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you on the ground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough of all the rules you break. We've had enough of all the money you make. We've had enough, no more life at stake. We've had enough, this is a proclamation. It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great.